services value creation through shift in digital transformation. I would like to invite our panelists. First, we have Meera Sangvi Belluri. She is Robotics Global Program Lead with HP. Then we have Shyam Sundar. He is Digital Transformation and Business Process Automation Leader with Hexaware Technologies. Then we have Mr. Chela Pandian Pichai. He's AVP and Global Head Talent, Culture, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion and L&D with Biocon Biologics. And we have our moderator, Mr. Buddhaditya Banerjee. He's client partner with Global Capability Centers with IBM. Please put your hands together for this panel.
A person who takes money from you and puts almost 8 decades of experience with me in this panel. And a very interesting topic, right? Which says reimagining how you create value from a shared services perspective for the enterprise. So we are going to kind of take a deep dive on that. From a personal experience perspective, there are 4 examples, right, which I want to kind of put up as fodder for thought. These are live examples that I have witnessed with clients of my team. So number 1, it's about a UK-based retailer and one of the top 5 retailers globally, taking the initiative to not just automate certain tasks, but automating their entire record to report processes end to end. What did it involve? It did not just involve buying a commercially off-the-shelf solution and fitting it to certain use cases. It involved business process reengineering. It involved combining process mining, AI, and of course RPA to kind of produce results around cost savings of more than 40% and productivity savings as well. The second example is of a US-based food manufacturer who deployed Hyperledger-based blockchain platform for food traceability purposes, which is allowing them to trace their food products from shelf to farm in a matter of 6 seconds, right? And from roughly about 6 days. The third example is of a US-based retailer, again, who have recently set up a cloud modernization center of excellence and is helping the enterprise modernize and migrate applications to the cloud. So that initiative is led from the shared services organization. And the fourth example is of a US-based CPG, possibly the largest consumer goods company in the world, who have automated their trade promotion management, right? And again, that initiative has kind of been conceptualized. So these initiatives have been conceptualized, they have been designed, they have been led by the shared services organization, which is a departure from the past. They have been architected, they have been designed, and the budgeting decisions have been led from the India-based shared services. And of course, these have been led by the CEO of a GBS or shared services entity, or a global transformation program officer, or even, right, someone who has global authority and is kind of localized within the shared services, which clearly kind of brings us back to the topic, right? It's not just about cost arbitrage and putting about 2-3 people to save costs. It has kind of, I see the ball shifting, the needle shifting to kind of really generating certain value and designing these initiatives, driving that value from the shared services set up today. On that note, let me open this up to my panel for their thoughts and inputs. Meera, if I can come to you first. What are these values that a shared services, right? How would you kind of really encircle or define the value that shared services are expected to lend to their enterprise? And what is the reimagination around it, Meera?
So if I really were to talk about all the different benefits, say, that come in with every optimization that we've done over the last few decades. And optimization itself has a really nice curve, right? If you look at it, there was the process optimization as a phase, then there was a people optimization as a phase, and then, obviously shared service leaders have always looked for ways to save cost. And that's how they've also become transformation leaders. Most of the people who were in the shared service world, we were just joking how our roles have evolved. We weren't originally from the transformation world. We just evolved like the human race. Our roles evolved. Much similar, I believe that, to a large extent, I think one of the things that we need to look at in terms of benefits is, while there is the cost and all of that comes in, I don't think that's the driver. That's what you would lure people in, to say, yes, there's a cost saving. But eventually, when you want people to, look for it, come back for it more, that's when you need to give them more benefits. Things where you say end-to-end processing, you say integrated processing, you say insightful processing. That's what they're going to be excited about. That's what your clients are going to look for. That's what your employees are going to appreciate. Because at the end of the day, I think we're doing this for our clients and also for our employees. So we need to go back to that culture shift that I think I spoke in my presentation, and which I think is really important. So yeah, back to you.
Can I add one point
Absolutely.
to what Meera was mentioning and also what you mentioned? She mentions from a process and an organization culture perspective, which is interesting. From a technology perspective that he was mentioning, one of the areas that caught my attention on your statements and the examples that you mentioned is that technology is not just a magic wand. You can't buy automation from a shelf via license and deploy the license and automatically Zoom, everything will be done. It's a process that you need to follow, where you need to look at what are the areas that you need to automate, identify which ones you need to do, go through the entire journey, which typically would take 6 to 8 months' time, and then ensure you realize the benefits. So it is a process that every organization need to follow to get those successes of the examples that you mentioned, the 4 examples, which are interesting. So it's not a magic wand, all practical.
Right. And to that extent, right, I mean, the expectation of the enterprise has clearly shifted, like Meera, you're mentioning, from just kind of cost arbitrage to actually expecting the shared services to help accelerate profitable growth for the enterprise in itself. Shyam, on that note, you have had your firm footing in the technology industry for over 3 decades now. What role has technology got to play, right, in this reimagination of value creation by shared services?
Interesting you asked the question. Technology has always been an enabler in any form of action. It's not just now with the automation or the shared services area. Technology has always been an enabler in the business right from the time PCs came into the system or networks came into the system or internet and those kind of stuff. So it is continuing to play the role of enabler. And with more and more newer innovations that are coming in, like for example AI, NLP-based programming areas, conversational discussions to understand and analyzing speech and emotions of the speakers and everything else. So these are things that did not exist before, but now it is existing. Now the question is, how does a process experts and functional experts make sense of these new innovations and then look at what more they can do, what more outcome can be done. Okay? So effectively what is happening with technology is that it is always moving one step ahead of what is required now. It's up to practitioners like each one of us in this room towards understanding how we can leverage this and then bring the outcome as fast as possible. And that is where adoption comes into play. Yeah.
Right, and to that extent earlier, if technology was embedded into businesses, now, right, businesses are embedded into technology. Chela, if I may come to you next, you have had extensive experience from a talent perspective, right? Meera spoke about from a process perspective, right? There needs to be a massive overhaul. You mentioned from a technology perspective what sort of overhaul is needed. There is obviously an expectation overall as well. What are the implications from a talent perspective? And then how do we enable this? Where talent and culture today from a shared services organization perspective is concerned?
I think it's a great question, and the way you're putting all these together, the business model, operating model, the reimagination of that, technology. But what will make it happen is the people, the talent part. And of course, there is a culture culture is deeply embedded into how we wanted to reimagine and how we wanted to leverage the technologies. So I had an opportunity to set up a shared service in Kuala Lumpur for finance shared service, for a regional shared service center. The biggest problem was not even talent, the culture. So it kind of an eye-opener for us to see what we were missing as we were building. We started from scratch, right from license to building it to about 500 people organization. I was part of it. Without our interventions, without our involvement, the new culture was being formed. Whilst the parent company culture is on a pharma space, but this shared service for the first time we started there, the new culture was evolved. And it was a learning for us that if you don't put conscious efforts to retain your parent company culture, the new culture was formed. Probably because shared service, in India we talk about the BPO as a separate culture. And I'm not sure why it happened or how it happened, but BPO has always been looked at as a BPO culture. And then they talk about different cultures. Good or bad is not what I'm talking, but there is a culture. So for shared service, there is a culture which comes. And when I dive deep to understand what forms that culture, it's also because of the kind of talent we grow there. Right? So talking about talent, it's very important that the organization understands that the kind of talent we hire in shared service or we grow in shared service in an established organization when you transfer talents into shared service, it's a vertical skill. And we talk about subject matter experts, and that is what shared service holds. There's a lot of pros and cons in that, which I will go deeper later. But the talent, three problems which we faced in this particular case. One, it's not about hiring, it's about keeping the talent for long. And second, aligning them to the culture in which you wanted them to flourish. And third, in terms of governing the culture, there's something called culture governance, where it on and off it goes out of control, and how do you bring it back? So those are the big challenges we faced. But I'll talk a little later more about how we handle that.
Sure. Sham, if I may come to you next, right? So process, talent, technology. We have set at least the foundational pillars to reimagining a shared services. How do we now engage stakeholders and make them believe that this reimagination can be driven from the shared services? What's the business case?
Yeah, interesting how you worded that question, Buddha. So it's about how do you engage stakeholders, and that's where I would tell you from my experience is that you have to be a salesman internally. You have to bring them on board, just like how you bring customers on board when you go acquiring new customers. You bring customers on board into your philosophy of delivery, into your philosophy of how you deliver services for them, and then get them comfortable with the whole thing. So similarly, when you're working on an automation project or a shared services project, in terms of how you bring in new functions with the shared services, you have to bring your stakeholders on board. Get them comfortable to the process that it is safe, it is risk-free, and at the same time they'll get the benefits that they would eventually want to have in their business or in their functions. And that is a sales process that whoever is running the operations or the shared services leadership should have with the stakeholder members. Okay? And that's a critical part or a critical skill that we need to develop as shared service practitioners. Right? It's not just about people, process, management, and technologies and everything else. It's also about the sales process that goes through the entire onboarding of the stakeholders.
Right. Meera, if I may come to you next, right? You spoke about the ability to be a salesperson, right? And to be a champion for the cause of shared services internally within the organization. Do we have that capability within our current set of leaders? Right, to be the champions and to see that reimagined value and to sell that reimagined value to their enterprise. And we're obviously noticing with the examples that we spoke of that there is a definite center of gravity shift towards shared services, or an expected gravity shift. So, your thoughts?
Thank you. Excellent question. If I were to kind of share a little perspective, and this will be like slightly shifting from the question as well, because I think you'll find the answer in what I'm going to share. If you look at how today the delivering of value happens, it is obviously through our people. We've touched about it. Culture being the core of it, very, very important. Even being in the transformation side, there's always so much emphasis on the culture, right? Why? Because at the end of the day, people are the ones who are going to deliver it, right? They are the ones who are going to give that benefit. If they have not been bought into it, they're not going to do this. And that is where I think we need to understand and appreciate. Which is why, to a large extent, when you're bringing in a shift, you need to bring in the people from the bottom as well, all the way. Lift them up. The only way we empower ourselves is when we lift others up. We don't do it by just saying, let's deliver this is our next target. Okay, we've done this, so what? Let's do next. That's not what the idea is. The idea is sometimes it has to be driven tops down, and there has to be a bottoms up. It has to be a nice marriage. It has to be something where both of them are in sync, because if it is not, people are going to feel disconnected. The leader is saying something, but you're there, you're like a glass ceiling. I don't know, I can't touch you. But if I don't feel the change, I don't feel the shift, how am I going to sell that? If you want, I go back to that same thing of being an integrated shared service. If you want to be an integrated shared service, if your employees are not integrated, if you're, at the bottom, at the base, if they feel like, oh God, this process could have been done so much more easier, and you're not hearing them, you're not doing enough for them, they don't have the tools to automate themselves, they don't have enough leverage to go on, how do you expect them to play the ground? How do you expect them to experiment? How do you expect them to come back and say, this doesn't work, the system is, just in simple words, sucks? And that's what you need, and which is why I believe that it has to be both sides. And then you obviously have your entire management chain that drives the message home. So you have your tops down who believes in it, because they're not disconnected. They're not saying, oh, let's just look at cost cutting. You also have your bottoms up that says, yes, we believe that they think of it as an investment. The bottoms up also believes that this is for me, it will help me. Because they have to be, like the way we spoke about, technology has to be an enabler. And a change has to be an enabler. And you can't expect a change agent alone to come and do it. Sometimes you have to, imbibe a change culture, and which is what is very, very important. So transformation is never a standalone in my mind. The more I'm in transformation, I've realized transformation is about people. That's the most important thing. You have to start thinking differently. Like initially our parents only thought of books of account as physical books. Today, books of account is a term that's still used, but people think differently. That's the culture shift that's come in. But the acceleration is much faster, so that obviously needs to come in at that pace. So yeah, thank you.
And is that something that you're looking to enable through democratizing automation, through the citizen automation program, right? So it's about people, Chela. Now, some might consider this a disadvantage, somebody might consider this as an advantage, but the fact of the matter is that the future really belongs to a hybrid workforce, not in terms of the location, but this workforce will constitute of human workers working alongside bot workers. What is your way of kind of looking at it? Is this an opportunity? Is this a challenge? And how are you really addressing the same?
It's very complicated. So I couldn't find an answer. I started doing my PhD. Seriously, I'm not joking. I'm doing a PhD in HR digital transformation, keeping all this in mind. But that's 2 years to go. But to answer your question, I think we will coexist. And there are a little bit of psychological safety issue comes for employees when the digital advancement is happening, especially in shared service. Again, going back to my Kuala Lumpur experience, when we're setting up, the language skill was very important because we were catering to Asia Pacific and some of the Eastern Europe markets, and especially the Asia Pacific like Japan, Indonesia, Thailand, and also in Korea. You cannot manage with I'm sure some of the shared service experts would acknowledge, you cannot excel with English, and the local language becomes very important. Being a finance shared service, there were a lot of discussion was required with vendors, and we needed to hire people from these countries to be based here. And fortunately, Malaysia was hosting a lot of these language skills because these country people were living there, and because a lot of shared service in Kuala Lumpur in the recent past. But then we need to hire people from outside Malaysia, Malaysians. And then suddenly it becomes a new need for a different culture. Because we were used to only having Malaysians and Singaporeans in that, the other business. But it's our own shared service center. And then there was need for understanding this different country people and bring a new culture into the organization. That's where it was a learning experience for us. So back to digital, so these language skills we wanted, in fact, some of us were foreseeing that this could be managed through a technology. So today, language translators are there. Fraction of a second, you speak in English, it converts into whichever the language you want. But there was a lot of apprehension for leaders to adopt that idea itself. And they did not until this COVID came. When the COVID came, they started leveraging those technologies. One way somebody said in the previous speaker, COVID helped us, right? So today they have optimized it not from the cost perspective, but also from the efficiency perspective. Because these other country people are not staying long in another country. So obviously there was a huge attrition issue, and then eventually they moved to this technology. So this is one example, but I'm sure there are a lot more can be done through technology in shared service. And I think that we will coexist. And what skills we needed to adopt this is understanding how do we leverage technology. So today it's not about technology itself. The adoption is where there is a huge gap. And that digital has to become a culture of an organization. It should not stand outside as an enabler. It should be within the culture and become an enabler. Then people will adopt it because that's the way of life. And for which needs to be a psychological safety that I'm not losing job because of digital coming in or robotic solutions coming in or any other form of artificial intelligence. It's only that I will still be here to make all this happen. So that psychological safety will make a lot of people adopt the technologies.
Sure. I would want to reach out to the audience for their questions, their opinions as well. So I'll quickly kind of now maybe have concluding remarks coming from each of you. Shan, if talent is the greatest imperative, right, and it's the foundation for basing all the reimagination, easier to attract talent, difficult to retain. How challenging has it been in your experience, and what can be done to kind of really address this entire talent war that we are experiencing today?
Yep. Interesting question in terms of the two options that you gave, easier to attract talent or easier to retain talent. I think it's both tough. I would say it's easier in the sense that if organization takes an earnest effort towards nurturing talent and building talent or evolved talent, like how we all evolved as leaders from where we started our careers to where we are today. If you are also able to nurture your new joiners who are coming out from colleges, from universities in the country, and if you're able to build and nurture them with the tools to learn and understand and grow the business, I think you'll be able to do both easier from an easier perspective. That is, attract talent and also retain them. Okay.
Sure. Meera, coming to you for your parting thoughts. While obviously the boundaries might be diminishing, albeit at a slow pace, between the enterprise and shared services, how important is it for the shared services leader to have a seat at the table and be in a position to control and design budgets?
Okay. So, first of all, to answer the question, everybody always needs a seat at the table, irrespective, because I think perspectives are what today's world comprises of. Viewpoints are what today's world comprises of, right? So it's really, really important to have perspective. It's really important to get a point of view of everyone out there. About budgets, yes, the budget budgets do help, because then at which speed are you accelerating? At what speed are you making decisions? Budget is only limited, mostly that I've seen, is to decision making. Most often than not, that's where we get stuck, right? I mean, can I make this decision today, or do I need to wait for 6 months or 3 months or whatever? It doesn't work, because half the time then you're losing out. You have some innovation, some creativity that is there. That is what you're nurturing, right? And for the retaining of talent, and which is where it's important for us to make the decision now. And that's why budget is important, not from just to have a budget, but to make that decision saying, should we go in for the next technology? Should we have this platform? Should we hire the right talent, or should we nurture our talent? Let's invest in our talent. Whatever may be the question, that budget just makes that decision-making process easier. And I think all of us have, like the way Shyam mentioned, we've all grown in our careers. And what we've seen is that we don't just want to, just because we've got a budget, we want to spend it anyways. Most often than not, most of these technologies, we try to find a midway, which is where, like, how much can we upscale, how much we need to get it from outside, how much can we do it ourselves. So the whole DIY culture has become such a big thing right now, and which is where it's important for us to find that blend. But there's only so much you'll do with DIY. And even when you have to do DIY, you have to get your materials. So that is what it is, and which is why it's very, very important to have that decision-making seat at the table and having that budget for yourself, which is why I think it's very, very important.
Sure. Chela, talent is the greatest imperative. Everyone has resonated with that particular reality. I'm going to leave it open for you. What could be some of the key takeaways, right, for CHROs and other HR leaders to enable the shift in value creation from a shared services perspective?
I think both of them have summarized it well. I would say I think the leadership in shared service is going to be increasingly important, and I think that's going to be future. It's not about only consolidating it for the purpose of profit.
Are we going to import and offshore leaders from the global enterprise to lead this reimagination, or are we going to find those leaders within shared services?
We will find, and because it's going to be the way of life as I foresee, and we are not consolidating, our companies are not consolidating for the purpose of profit, but it is also for the knowledge. If you see, it's a consolidation of skills. You're getting the subject matter experts to do that. But the flip side of it is we will have a huge boredom setting in, because I've been doing the same job time and again. So how do I get rotated? Because I've been hired for a subject matter expert. I think that's where the upskilling comes, like the way Meera nicely addressed that we need to rotate and then see how we can create opportunity within the shared service or outside in the larger organization to see how we can retain talent. But it's an important skill to have. And lastly, the general management skill for leader is very important. It is not about just running the one wing of your business, but it's about having the general management skill to be ready to take up different opportunities within the organization and then grow from there. I think that will become even more important as we get into the future.
Sure, thank you so much. I think we have had interesting perspectives floating through, and thanks for your thoughts. We'd like to take a few questions and any opinions that you have as audience, please.
Employee can coexist. But let me talk about the executive level or the associate level. A bot can do what they are doing. So wouldn't they be afraid of losing their job? Like, wouldn't they feel that their job is being done by a bot? That's the first level when a person enters to the field, right? So how do you look about this particular issue or concept?
Let me ask you a question back. What do you not like about your day? Like, I'm sure you love your job, that's why you're doing it. But what is it that you don't like about your job? Certain task. It doesn't have to be a job. The task, what you don't like. Right? That is the question that we are asking here. That's the question that we want you to ask yourself. It's about the task. When we say robots are here to take away, people say robots are here to take away the jobs, I would like you to rephrase that as not a job, but a task. And which is what is really important, because it's the tasks that we don't want to do. There are certain tasks, I also still have tasks I absolutely despise doing. And I'd love my day if it's not there. But then I find new tasks that I don't want to do, but that's a different thing. But the challenge is that there are always these tasks which you feel, am I using my mind fully? Am I being creative? Am I being innovative? Am I putting my 100% out there? And if the answer is no, then maybe we need to figure out, intelligent bots, we need to figure out having an ML, we can figure out having an NP, we can figure out whatever it is, the solution to it. But that's not something that you want to do. What you want to do is bring in your intelligence. What do I as an individual bring to the table? You want that seat at the table. Why? Because you bring in a perspective. A robo can't do that. And I tell everybody this, the interesting example. The day that the robos start getting frustrated on a Bangalore traffic to say, I hate this traffic, we've not arrived there. With robotics, we haven't, not even with intelligent bots, we haven't. They can drive, they can be self-driving cars, they can be bots that will do certain jobs, but they're not going to emote, they're not going to bring in that intelligence which you're going to bring in, and which is what is really important. Most people who join the corporate world, including myself, I'm sure all of us may not agree or just may not voice it out, wanted to quit their jobs in the first few months. Is really like, what am I doing? Is this what I studied? Is this what was taught me? I was taught how to do like a CXO level job, and look at what I'm doing. This is such a menial job. That's where it is. That's the question. You're questioning the status quo, and you're giving that back to your employees. You're giving that empowerment to say your intelligence is why we have hired you, not for you how quickly you can type, or how quickly you can send an email, or how quickly you can jump on a call. No, we've not hired you for that at all.
You heard it from experts, and nothing more to add. Just that it gives you space for upskilling into various other dimensions. Today we are not able to do because mundane jobs keeps us busy, right? And the work-life balance gets disturbed because we're not enjoying what we do. So all those can be moved there. But of course, robots can do much more intelligent jobs. But at least to answer on the entry level, those are some of the advantage we have. You will do much better roles.
Thank you,
So role definitions will change.
Yeah.
The current roles will be doing more value at work rather than the typical data entry jobs, transactions that will be done by technology.
True. HR and business leaders will reimagine how do you want to have the job descriptions for an individual, because now you will go tap the hidden potential or untapped potential of an individual. Today, there's so much load, so you wanted to bring some analysts, some entry level, and put them there. But later we'll reimagine the way we can manage resources.
Or you become a salesperson or a moderator. That's unlikely to be replaced.
Yeah.
Any further questions, please?
If I could even add a perspective to this question, the one thing that you need to I know we spoke more like a strategic responses, and I keep thinking that maybe we need to also get transactional when we respond to questions. So like jobs where, say for example, earlier we used to hire data entry operators. Now that's what we will not hire. Who will we hire? Somebody who basically can bring in the insight to this data that's been keyed in. So when I used to do pivots and I used to create macros, because I've just been going into the management chain and growing in my career, I used to create a macro and my bosses used to be happy. But it's not about creating macro. It's about that you create that pivot and then you bring in your perspective. That's what every level does, right? So what we're going to land up doing is the jobs that are at the base will start pushing people to think further and further. And that's what you're going to do. You're going to bring in a shift also from the bottoms up, because insights are also going to start coming in from the base. So which means that your mid-level management does not need to provide insights. Then they need to do further insights on what all is making sense in the end-to-end segment or in the industry segment or another perspective, right? So yeah. So I have to add.
Any more questions?
Aspect of their own selves in it. But my question on this is basically, I'm just reiterating what you just said was, we need people who will challenge the status quo, right? But when we ever say that, do you think it's it's also prudent on our parts to challenge the educational system, because our educational system right now is, I can, see, I was a lecturer also. I'm an assistant professor in HR, okay, and right now I work in the corporate. But even when I was teaching the same things what I learned. And I learned that subjects 4 years ago. And at that point itself it was outdated. And yet I was supposed to teach the same things. Now when we talk about challenging status quo, I'm not pointing at you directly. I'm just saying, I'm asking the panel, right? So don't you think it's time we also made some improvements as a corporate entity? We have to make some appeal or some improvements on our education systems so that, we don't get, robots coming out of the colleges, and we get people who can actually think.
Yes.
So what's your opinion on that?
See, one of the things that I really like the way you ended, and the reason is that because can we be more, given that the evolution is happening so quickly, why aren't we evolving at that speed? And which means that, what we're keying in. For example, when the first job, I remember me being told, the slide has to be gray, light blue, this color, this font, and then they're like, be creative. How do I be creative? Please tell me, explain to me, how can I be creative? I am a person who loves colors, and somebody who looks at me, my wardrobe, my way of presenting, my presentations has all become a standard way, because that's what has corporatized me. And truth be told, today's education in parts, very, very small parts, are changing. So interestingly, my 8-year-old daughter, again I'm going to take her example here, when she first joined school, which is like 2 years ago, 4th grade, 4 years ago, I'm so sorry, so sorry. So when she joined her first grade, she had a subject called robotics, and she said, Mama, I'm going to learn robotics and I'm going to teach you. And I said, I would love to see that happen. And I was like, I was obviously saying it in my head, and I was like, what is she going to learn? Let me see. Interestingly, they were given Lego sets. They were given problem statements saying that right now she has to prepare a goalkeeper who at every time will kick a goal. And I was like, how are you doing that? I want to learn. Because interestingly, some parts of the education system are changing, but is it accessible to everybody? Half the time when I talk about the fees of her school, it's shameful for me to even say that this is the kind of money I'm spending on her school. Because I spend that for my entire education, and I sound like my parents right now, but I do, because it's the year's fees. Can everybody afford that education? No, but I can, and that's why I'm doing it. But that's not the point. Everybody should have had access to something like that, where a child would look forward to going into school, learning subjects which are not your math, English, social science, sciences, and blah, blah, blah. There has to be, things like even mental health. I keep saying, why is there no mental health in any schools? That's the biggest topic we miss out on. Most of us suffer from depression, and we don't even know we are going through depression. At some point in time, every human being goes through it. But it's just that we don't even know what term, and we are half the time ashamed of it. Stuff like that. So education, can it do better? For sure, for sure. There's a lot more that we can do there. People should be asked to solve problems. I don't think they should be taught in a specific style. It's about how can you solve a problem. Because if you tell them, let's figure out how can we solve poverty, because when I'm explaining to her again, what does government do? It's free water, free roads, good roads, and blah, blah, blah. Half the time when we're driving on Bangalore, she's like, what is the government doing? So, they're questioning. They're already getting to that level where they're questioning. So they need to find those responses. And we need to give them that freedom again. Like we would love to do it with our employees, we have to do it with our children as well, because that's the only way we'll churn out better thinking people who do not want to join in as a data entry operator. And hopefully people stop taking those jobs as well, so that we are forced to think differently. Yeah? I'm sure somebody has.
Interesting question that you asked, and don't stop with just asking the question. My request to you is raise those voices, because I strongly believe the more corporates like us demand from educational institutions, the more educational institutions will evolve and ensure that the demand is met. A couple of years back, before COVID and few years, there were finishing schools that corporates used to run in some of the universities. I think that has been disbanded now because of COVID and various other reasons. But I think it's important that there's more and more corporate involvement in the education system that is there. And I think every one of us in this room, and also the larger corporate segment that exists in the country, has to push the education system to make that happen. And my belief is that, like how we have evolved as individuals and the professionals, and I'm a strong believer that even the education system will also evolve to meet the demands of the corporate world. And it will happen. And please continue to raise the voice. Thanks for asking that question.
Thank you.